They cast him out like he never mattered. But when the fire came, people said they saw someone on the ridge, just watching. In Pine Ridge, the streets didn't just lead home. They led to a way of life. A life carved from hard work, shared burdens, and an unspoken code. You earned your place by carrying weight no one else would. Henry Benson understood this better than anyone. For 23 years, he was the town's silent guardian, a man who walked into infernos with nothing but grit and faith. He pulled farmers from mangled steel, plucked children from swollen creeks, and once, famously, saved a dog from a burning porch without ever breathing a word of it. His hands, scarred and calloused, were a testament to a life spent serving, not seeking glory. The town knew him, respected him. Kids pointed, whispered, "There goes Henry." But sometimes, silence is mistaken for something else. And when the fire came, it wasn't from wood and smoke, but from within the very walls he protected. Imagine a life built on trust, sweat, and the silent promise to always show up. Now imagine that life being ripped away, not by fire or flood, but by the very people you swore to protect. This isn't just a story about a man losing his job. It's about the betrayal that burns deeper than any flame, and the quiet strength it takes to stand when your world is crumbling. What you're about to listen will challenge your understanding of loyalty, justice, and the true meaning of heroism. It began subtly, as all betrayals do. A whisper about a delayed engine, a radio log mysteriously altered, a report vanishing into thin air. Small, insidious doubts meant to be dismissed with a simple question instead grew fangs. Some murmured that Henry was losing his touch, that the years had finally worn him down. Others, more cunning, simply watched, their silence a predatory patience like vultures circling a still-breathing prey. At the town hall, a place Henry had known intimately, its oak beams had witnessed countless fundraisers, solemn memorials, and boisterous 4th of July safety talks. But this night held no festive air, no comforting hymns. This was a public reckoning, an execution disguised as a community meeting. He arrived early, still in his uniform, a second skin he'd worn with honor for 23 years. He clutched his cap, not from nerves, but as a man anchoring himself to the last solid thing in a world suddenly tilting. Then Mayor Tommy Thompson approached the podium. Here's the agonizing twist. Tommy was a man Henry had once pulled from the twisted wreckage of an SUV, his own hands stained with Tommy's blood. Henry remembered the raw, desperate gratitude in Tommy's eyes that night, the whispered, "Thank you for saving my life," repeated like a prayer. And now Tommy was poised to repay that debt by dismantling his savior. But memory, like gratitude, can be fleeting. Tommy cleared his throat, his voice a funereal drone. "We trusted you, Henry. And now this. No evidence, no explanation, just a chilling, dismissive this." And what Henry uttered next in that hushed, hostile room revealed the true measure of his soul. "Those reports were altered. I didn't delay anything. I've never lied to this town. But the truth, as you are about to witness, was the one thing no one in Pine Ridge was willing to hear. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a suffocating blanket of judgment, a final verdict delivered before a single fact was weighed. From the back, a venomous whisper. "He's just trying to save face." It was then I understood their minds were already made up. Before his defense, before any evidence, before justice had a chance to breathe. This isn't about personal feelings, Henry. It's about integrity. You're dismissed, effective immediately. And what happened next will shatter your heart. But the worst, the true humiliation, was only just beginning.
Henry didn't protest, didn't demand justice. He nodded once, a gesture so subtle it could have been mistaken for a sigh. And then he turned and walked, past the rows of neighbors who couldn't meet his gaze, past the reporters scribbling half-stories, past the space where his picture used to hang in the hallway, Firefighter of the Year, 2012. Outside, the wind had teeth. It was autumn, but it felt like winter. On the courthouse steps, His fire jacket lay crumpled in the mud, like garbage, like some forgotten donation at the back of a thrift shop. The badge stitched to the chest, Pine Ridge Fire and Rescue, was soaked, the thread fraying. He picked it up slowly, brushed at the dirt with weathered fingers. His hands had known burns and calluses. They'd gripped hoses in blizzards and radios during lightning storms, but tonight they shook just a little. Not from fear, but from something colder, shame. He didn't drive home. He walked. Past Main Street, where the barber shop once gave him free haircuts, past the diner that used to name a breakfast sandwich after him, the Benson Special. Eggs, bacon, black, coffee, just how he liked it. No one waved. At the corner, he passed the hardware store. The owner's son was standing out front, locking up. That boy used to follow Henry around like a shadow, had even dressed as him for Halloween once. A little plastic helmet, red suspenders, a homemade badge with the word "Hero" scribbled in crayon. Tonight, the boy said nothing, just turned away. 3 teens passed by on bicycles. They were laughing about something until they saw him. One slowed, glanced sideways, and said under his breath, but just loud enough to land, "Fire fraud." Henry didn't stop, didn't even turn his head, but his pace slowed, just slightly. Each step felt like it dragged the whole town behind him. At the edge of Pine Ridge, the streetlights thinned. The trees grew taller, darker. A storm rolled in from the north. No thunder yet, just that eerie pressure in the air that says something's coming. He paused at the hill. From there, you could see the old firehouse, lit up, alive. Through the windows, he could make out the shift changing. Men and women he'd trained, laughing, pouring coffee, loading gear. One of them would be taking his chair, his locker, his calls, and maybe, eventually, his stories. But Henry knew something they didn't teach in the academy. Fires don't lie. They strip everything away: titles, excuses, politics. What's left is what matters, and he had always mattered. He pulled his collar up against the wind and turned away, not from the firehouse, but from the ache, from the way this town could forget what mattered most, from the betrayal, but not from his purpose, because sometimes, to keep standing, you have to walk through the dark alone. And Henry Benson, he was still standing, even in the cold, even without the badge, even without the cheers, because he knew integrity doesn't disappear just because others can't see it. It burns on, quiet, steady, and strong. After the night Pine Ridge cast him out, Henry Benson didn't slam a door. He didn't argue with the mayor. He didn't curse the town that had once fed him pie and called him hero. He just packed. It didn't take long. A duffel bag with 2 shirts and a shaving kit, a faded photo, creases folding the edges of his wife's smile, and a toolbox that rattled with loose screws, old screws, and too many memories. He left the uniform hanging in the back closet. Didn't want to see it anymore. Didn't want it seeing him either. He left the keys to the firehouse on the kitchen table, beside a note no one would read. He closed the door without looking back. About 6 miles past the last gas station, beyond where the county even bothered maintaining the road, there stood a broken, leaning cabin near the edge of the tree line. Locals had stopped hunting there. Some said it was haunted. Henry thought maybe that was a good sign. It meant no one would come looking. That's where he went. The sun hadn't fully risen when he arrived. The light was pale gold, the kind that filters through pine needles and settles gently on forgotten places. It revealed the sag in the roof, the ivy creeping into the porch boards, the shattered bird feeder hanging sideways from a rusted nail. The air smelled of rot, rust, and something older. Abandonment, maybe. Henry stepped out of the truck, stood in the silence, and took a long breath. Then he took another and another. He didn't cry. He didn't sigh. He just reached for the crowbar. The front door groaned open like it hadn't seen a man in years. Inside, it was cold. Shadows layered like dust, cobwebs in corners, one chair, one broken table, a potbelly stove long retired. He dropped his bag by the wall, set down the toolbox, and sat on an old milk crate that creaked under his weight. He stared out the window. There was nothing to see, and somehow that felt like peace. For the next few months, Henry lived without clocks. No morning alarms, no sirens, no 10-4. Calls echoing in his ears. He didn't miss them. He missed the people, the weight of responsibility, the kind that made you wake up sharp, shave close, stand tall. That was gone. But he didn't collapse. He adapted. He patched the holes in the roof with scrap tin and bent nails. It wasn't pretty, but it held. He found a rusted shovel behind the shed and dug a shallow well. The water tasted like metal, but it was cold and clean. He built a small table from the remains of a fallen pine. He sanded it smooth, polished it with old motor oil, sat at it every night, even when there was nothing to eat but beans. Not because he needed a table, but because something in him still believed in building. His meals were simple: beans, rice, wild greens when he found them. Coffee was instant, weak. He drank it black. He didn't talk much, but sometimes just to hear a voice he'd read aloud from old manuals, fire codes, survival guides. Then he'd chuckle to himself, as if there's a manual for this. Each evening, he opened a weathered leather notebook and tried to write. Tried to name what he was feeling. Most nights, he got as far as the date, and then just sat there, staring at the blank page. Other nights, he didn't even bother with the date. Just silence. The fire would crackle in the stove. The wind would press against the cabin walls like breath, and Henry would sit, unmoving, listening, not to the world outside, but to the quiet within. Then, one afternoon, a sound broke the stillness. It came sharp and sudden, a high, cracking cry that split the silence like a fault line. Henry rose, stepped outside. The wind was picking up, brushing through the pines. Somewhere above, a shadow passed quickly through the sky. Then, another cry. This time, closer. He turned his eyes upward, and there it was, an eagle spiraling out of control, one wing trailing behind it like a torn flag. It hit the treetops, tumbled, and vanished into the underbrush with a dull thud. Henry didn't hesitate. He pushed through the brush, boots crushing ferns and branches. The undergrowth resisted, but he pressed on. Then he saw it. The bird lay in the clearing, feathers like broken glass, chest heaving, one wing bent wrong. It didn't hiss, didn't claw, just looked at him. And in that look, wild, wide, and silent, he saw something strange. Recognition. Like it knew. Like it had fallen from more than just sky. He knelt, took off his flannel, wrapped it gently around the bird, cradling it like a newborn. The eagle didn't fight, didn't flee, just breathed. Henry whispered, "You're all right. I've got you," and carried it home. He cleared the table, made a perch from an old fence post and tied it near the window, boiled water, cleaned the wing, wrapped it with strips from an old shirt, set down a tin lid filled with water. For days, he sat beside it, speaking softly. The eagle said nothing, but it stayed. Weeks passed. Henry gave the bird a name, though never said it out loud. Some things you don't name with your mouth, only with your heart. Every day, he checked the wing, changed the bandage, left scraps nearby. Some mornings, the eagle would ruffle its feathers, flap weakly, and rest again. He'd sip his coffee on the porch and whisper, "You're not ready yet, but you're close." And then came the truck. Dust trailed behind the old pickup as it rolled up the drive. Two men stepped out, boots, denim, and smirks. Locals, familiar faces with unfamiliar eyes. the kind of men who remembered your mistakes, louder than your sacrifices. Well, if it isn't the bird whisperer, one said. The other pointed to the eagle on the perch. Looks like you both forgot how to fly. They laughed, drove off. Henry didn't move, but the eagle turned its head sharply, eyes fixed on the truck as it disappeared down the road. Henry watched it for a moment, then murmured, "They're wrong about you too." That night, Henry sat by the window. The eagle was beside him, one talon on the ledge, eyes watching the woods. The fire was low. Shadows danced gently across the walls. He opened his notebook, and for the first time in months, the pen moved. No hesitation, no scratched lines, just truth. They think I'm finished, but ashes don't mean it's over. Sometimes that's just the start. He closed the book, set it beside the coffee mug. Outside, the wind howled softly, like a lullaby for the broken. Inside, two figures sat in quiet solidarity, one healing wing, one healing soul. Henry never sought out redemption. He wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. He just needed a place to breathe again, to remember who he was without the badge, without the stares, without the noise. And in that silence, he found it. Not forgiveness, not justice, but stillness, strength, and a fierce, feathered companion who, like him, was learning to fly again. 3 years, 3 long, dry, bitter years. That's how long Pine Ridge lasted without him. It didn't fall all at once. Towns like Pine Ridge never do. They fray. They erode like an old rope stretched too thin, and no one sees it snapping until the weight hits the ground. At first, they pretended things were fine. Mayor Thompson kept the press releases flowing, ribbon cuttings, budget meetings, backslapping photo ops. The town council talked about efficiency. They spoke in numbers, not names. When the fire department lost volunteers, it called it a staffing transition. When the truck failed to start on a winter morning, they called it maintenance, delay. When the sirens stopped working, no one called it anything, because no one wanted to admit what they'd done. They hadn't just fired Henry Benson, they'd cut out the town's spine, and now it was starting to collapse. The summer of that 3rd year was the kind that made dogs lie in the shade and trees look like ghosts. 60 days, not a drop of rain. The grass turned yellow, the soil cracked like old paint. Children stayed inside. Even the breeze felt tired, and all it took was one spark. Maybe it was a fallen power line. Maybe a cigarette flicked from a passing car. No one would ever know. But by the time smoke rose over the northern ridge, it was already too late. The smell of lemon-scented furniture polish mixed with something new. Fear. Mayor Thompson stood behind, his desk white-knuckling the phone. Sweat pooled beneath his collar, his voice, once full of certainty, now cracked with dread. Brush fire. Yes. No. We don't have crews. We don't have backup. Just send someone. Anyone. The line went dead. He slammed the receiver down and turned to his clerk. Why didn't we call mutual aid last week? We had the forecast. The clerk didn't answer. She couldn't. Because everyone knew the truth. There was no plan. They had let it all wither. And now, fire had found a home. The fire moved like a hungry animal. It licked the treetops, leapt across dry fields, devoured fence lines in minutes. Smoke crawled low, thick and black, hugging the houses. The sun disappeared behind it. Sky turned bronze, then bruised purple. Children clung to their parents as cars were hastily loaded. Generators buzzed, horses whinnied, dogs barked in panic, straining at chains. One man stood on his roof with a garden hose, spraying his shingles as if he could hold back hell with a trickle. Another threw photos into a plastic bin, tears streaking, his ash-smudged cheeks. Sirens sounded somewhere, but they were distant, disjointed, too far, too late. The people ran into the streets, looking for someone to follow, and found no one. The square once hosted barbecues, parades, Christmas lightings. Now, it was filled with confusion. Elders in lawn chairs, coughing into handkerchiefs. Mothers, holding babies wrapped in wet towels. Teenagers scrolling their phones, searching for news that hadn't been written yet. The air was thick, heat, smoke, fear. The kind of fear that paralyzes. Someone rang the church bell twice. That had always been the signal, evacuate. But no one knew where to go. There were no buses, no staging grounds, no officials, no plan, only voices. My baby can't breathe. She's got asthma. Where do we go? Where's the shelter? Where's the mayor? Where's the fire chief? And someone else replied, not angry, just hollow. There is no chief. The words settled like dust, and the silence after said it all. The man they exiled, the man they silenced, was the only one who ever truly understood how fire moves. And now it was moving, right through them. The lights flickered, battery lanterns lined the counters, panic shoppers filled carts with bottled water, duct tape, whatever looked useful. Two men stood near the back. Men who had once nodded along at the town hall. Men who whispered their own doubts about Henry. Now they whispered something else. Maybe we should go find him. Find who? You know who. Benson. He knows these woods. He knows this town. The other man scoffed, grabbing batteries. After what we did? After what we said? You think he'd come back? The first one looked toward the window, where the smoke now covered the sun. I think he'd come back anyway. The fire was no longer a line. It was a wall. It spread like it had purpose, like it remembered how it had been ignored, dismissed. It tore across the dry hills, swallowing barns and sheds, creeping toward porches and playgrounds. It was too fast, too strong. People fled in caravans, headlights zigzagging through back roads, unsure if they were outrunning the blaze or just circling it. And then something changed. Headlights, not scattered, not frantic, but in formation, coming down Ridge Road, one after another. Engines, tankers, trucks painted with faded red and white, retired rigs from farms and forgotten counties, private wells mounted on trailers. And at the front, a man. He walked calmly, jacket folded over his shoulder, boots caked with dirt, lines on his face deeper than before. But his spine was straight, his eyes forward, and those who saw him, those who remembered, felt something shift in their chest. It wasn't nostalgia, it was hope. Henry Benson had returned, not to reclaim a title, not for an apology, but because fire calls to those who know how to face it. And Henry had never turned away from fire, even when it burned him. As the trucks pulled in and the volunteers leapt out, orders flew like lightning, calm, clear, precise. Sandbags there, evacuate Block C, set a line at the ridge. Henry didn't shout. He pointed, nodded, directed with the ease of a man who had lived in fire longer than some had lived in town. Even Mayor Thompson stood still, mouth slightly open. He stepped forward. Henry. But Henry didn't stop. Didn't need a greeting. Didn't need permission. He just moved. Toward the smoke. Toward the flames. Toward the place he had always belonged. They thought they had erased him. But you can't erase a man like Henry Benson, because men like him don't live for applause. They live for moments like this. When everyone else runs out, they walk in. The headlights cut through the smoke like memory through denial. They weren't sleek, they weren't new, but they moved with purpose. One by one, the old engines rolled into Pine Ridge. Chassis dented, paint faded, sirens missing. They didn't roar, they growled. A kind of mechanical defiance, not government trucks, not state-issued saviors, but tools. rebuilt by hand, welded back to life by men and women the town had forgotten. And at the front of this unlikely procession, he walked. Henry. Benson, no badge, no fanfare. Just his jacket slung over one shoulder, boots thick with the dust of gravel roads, and a face carved by weather and silence. He walked with the kind of stillness that only comes from men who've already been through fire and learned to walk slower afterward. Somewhere, a child whispered, "Is that really him?" Another voice said nothing, just took a step back, like they'd seen a ghost, or maybe a ghost of their own conscience. Mayor Thompson pushed through the crowd, red-faced and winded. He stopped short, breath caught in his chest. "Henry, you came back?" Henry didn't blink, didn't smirk, didn't scowl. He looked once, not at the mayor, but past him, toward the ridge, toward the fire curling above the rooftops like judgment. Then his voice came low, even. "I didn't come back for you, Tommy." And then, louder, cutting through the confusion like an axe. "We've got 2 hours before the wind turns. I need water access, fuel lines, and 10 volunteers who can take orders. Now!" The words didn't echo. They landed, solid, like bricks placed, in trembling hands. The crowd stood still for a breath, then another. Not because they didn't believe him, but because shame takes time to peel off the skin. A young man, barely old enough to shave, stepped forward. "I'll go," he said, louder than his nerves wanted him to. Then a woman from the bakery, then one of the mechanics, then 2 retired firefighters who hadn't worn their helmets in years, and then it was movement, all at once, like something ancient. Had been uncorked. People grabbed garden hoses, shovels, flashlights. A teenager rolled up with a Gatorade cooler and said, "For the cruise." Someone dragged out walkie-talkies from a yard sale box marked junk. The square that had once banished a man now rallied around him. Henry didn't thank them. Didn't give speeches. He gave instructions. Inside the school gym, folding tables had become base camp. Henry crouched over a map. Creases, burn marks, scribbled circles with grease pencil. Wind charts, ridge lines, fuel pockets, every mark, a story. Every line, a memory. A woman in her 60s stepped inside. Former nurse. "Steady hands. I set up a triage station at the elementary," she said. "Just like we used to." Henry nodded once. No flourish. Another man burst in, sweat on his brow. "My boys, on Ridge Road clearing brush. Said he wouldn't go unless you were back." Henry didn't look up. "Tell him to clear the ditch, not the road. That's where the fire will jump." The man blinked, then ran. In 20 minutes, Henry rebuilt what bureaucracy had unraveled over 3 years. Not with votes, not with committees, but with trust, precision, purpose. No apologies, just the sound of boots moving again with direction. The flames grew teeth as night fell. Ash rained down like gray snow. Children watched from rooftops. Faces lit orange by the glow. And from above, it came, a shadow across the smoke. Wide wings, sharp eyes, the eagle, Henry's eagle. The one who had healed in silence with him. Now it soared, circling the chaos, as if watching over something it understood. One boy gasped, pointing, Look up!" And for a brief second, eyes lifted, away from fire, away from fear, toward flight. Henry climbed onto the back of the lead engine. Bullhorn in hand. Team A, North Ridge, use foam. Team B, hold the creek. Team C, block the windbreak at the southern field. No one crosses without radio. No one argued. Not even the mayor. They obeyed. Not out of fear, but because suddenly it was clear he belonged there. The mayor stood in the back, alone, arms crossed, eyes locked on the dusty window as distant sirens, now reborn, echoed through the town. He didn't speak, didn't apologize. But the tightness in his jaw said everything. that he remembered the SUV wreck, that he remembered the pie fundraisers, that he remembered what he'd traded for politics, and now he remembered what leadership actually looked like in that smoke-drenched night. Henry Benson wasn't just a man, he was a reckoning, a compass, a kind of justice without vengeance, because he didn't come back to punish, he came back to protect. A little girl clutched her mother's arm. "Is he a firefighter?" she asked. The mother wiped ash from her daughter's cheek and nodded. "He's the kind that never stopped being one." Henry passed them without noticing, his boots leaving prints in ash, his jacket streaked with soot, eyes on the horizon. No one stopped him, not because they couldn't, but because they understood. You don't interrupt a man walking back into fire, not when he's finally home. Pine Ridge had pushed him away, laughed behind closed doors, whispered, shunned. But when the wind changed, when the earth cracked, when the fire came, they didn't call the mayor. They called him, and he came. Not for pride, not for vindication, but because some men still believe in duty, even when the world forgets their name. The fire didn't whisper anymore. It roared, came like a wave breaking its banks, hungry, unreasoning, merciless. It climbed the ridge behind the school, cracked through tree trunks like matchsticks, and bore down on Pine Ridge as if it remembered. The maps better than the council ever did. Henry stood at the top of the old water tower, binoculars in one hand, radio in the other. Ash swept across his boots like fog. Beneath him, the town flickered. Emergency lights, lanterns, hurried footsteps. Through the lens, he saw it, the crest, the moment where control either held or vanished. He spoke into the radio, steady. 10 minutes before it eats the northern line. He climbed down, no urgency in his pace, just knowing. The air was hot enough to sting your teeth. Hoses spat water in thin lines that hissed before they hit the ground. Volunteers stood shoulder to shoulder, every face lit by fire, every eye on the treetops. A line of shovels dug trenches, foam sprayed. Metal buckled in the heat. Then someone shouted, "We're gonna lose the north edge!" Fear crawled into voices. One man backed up, instinct pulling him away from the heat. And then he was there. Henry, walking through the smoke, face blackened, eyes sharp. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He simply picked up the slack in the hose and stepped into the heat. He didn't need to be dramatic. Didn't need a sermon or a spotlight. What he needed was to show them that fire wasn't bigger than their will, that when led by steady hands, even chaos could be guided, that even now, especially now, they were stronger than the blaze. And they were. Because he was there. Inside the gymnasium, converted overnight into command post and shelter, rows of cots lined the walls. Children slept beside backpacks. Parents paced with blankets wrapped around them. At the far end, the old nurse, gray hair tucked in a bun, wrapped a young boy's hands in gauze, blistered but not broken. His mother sat nearby, rocking back and forth, whispering prayers. The A radio crackled. "We've got it holding, for now." A moment of silence followed, then a cheer. Someone raised their hands skyward. Another crossed herself. A teenager wept quietly and whispered, "He really came back for us." Wind shifted. A crack snapped through the trees, then a roar, wood splitting, branches falling. A burning pine crashed across the freshly dug ditch, sending embers flying like hornets. One of the volunteers screamed, dropping the hose and stumbling. "Back!" The line twisted wildly. Henry ran, boots over embers, smoke in his throat. He found the boy, no more than 19, frozen, wide-eyed, paralyzed by heat and sound. Henry grabbed his shoulders, firm. "What's your name, son?" Luke." "Luke," he said, steady. "I need you to breathe. You're not alone here. We're holding this together. You got that?" The boy's head bobbed. "Just once. Enough." Henry pressed the hose back into his hands. Let's go. There are moments in a fire when the heat makes you forget everything. Your training, your courage, even your name. But the men who stand in that heat anyway, they become something else, something sacred. The battle stretched through the night, backs bent, hands blistered. Every second bought with lungs full of smoke. Then at 3:47 a.m., the wind changed, just a shift. A whisper from the west, enough to send the fire back into ground already burned. The wall broke, not with a bang, but with a sigh, like the land exhaled relief. Ash began to fall, soft, slow, like snow from a black sky. All around Pine Ridge, volunteers dropped to their knees, some from exhaustion, some from emotion. One woman wept openly, holding her baby. Another man stared upward, mouth open like he couldn't believe he was still alive. Kids clapped from rooftops. A small dog howled, joyful. Henry stood in the center of a clearing, alone. His jacket smoked at the shoulders. His boots had melted, at the soles. His breath came rough, but he didn't move. Didn't fall, he simply looked up. Above him, gliding wide, silent, strong, the eagle, his eagle. Feathers glinting with the first silver of dawn, it circled once. Then again, a child nearby pointed. "That's his bird!" Heads turned skyward, and for a brief moment, even those who didn't believe in signs believed. Henry entered without a word. The gym was quieter now. Families asleep, lights dim. He walked down the rows of cots, checked the water tanks, examined the maps, adjusted the triage tables, never broke stride. Mayor Thompson approached, hat in hand, face pale. "Henry, the fire's out. The crews are resting. The town. We owe you everything." Henry turned slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, lined but steady. He looked at the mayor, then walked past him. No anger, no smile, just truth in silence. Because real heroes don't wait for applause. They don't collect praise. They don't make speeches. They just do the job, even when it's thankless, even when it hurts, even when the ones they protect are the same ones who once pushed them out. Henry stepped into the open. The sky was beginning to change, gray giving way to light. He paused at the edge of the stairs, looked once over his shoulder. The gym, the trucks, the families, the town, all still standing, somehow. He nodded, then turned his eyes to the horizon. Smoke still rose in patches. The earth was blackened, scarred, but the fire had been beaten. Not by politics, not by press releases, but by hands in the dirt, by people who remembered, if only for a night, what it meant to fight for each other, and by a man they once buried in rumor, who returned not to be proven right, but to do what was right. By morning, the fire was gone. It didn't leave with ceremony. It left quietly, as if knowing it had taken enough. The town it tried to swallow was still there, battered, soot-streaked, breathing heavy, but standing, just like Henry had. The smell of smoke lingered, woven into shirts, into hair, into memory. Children woke with red eyes. Parents rose stiff from floors. Grandparents coughed quietly into blankets. But for the first time in days, the wind was still. And that silence, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The town square wasn't planned as a meeting place that morning. No flyers, no announcements. But one by one they came, old boots crunching on gravel, families clutching thermoses, babies in arms. Elders helped down porch steps. Teenagers came too. The same boys who once called him fire fraud. They didn't speak now, didn't need to. Their presence was apology enough. A low murmur passed through the crowd like a prayer. Is he coming? They weren't asking about the mayor, or the sheriff, or any badge wearer. They meant him. The man who walked into fire when no one else did. The man they once walked out on. Henry stood at a steel sink. Water ran brown as he rinsed ash from his hands. His reflection stared back from a cracked mirror, older than he remembered. The beard was thicker now, gray at the chin, lines around the eyes deeper. He wasn't broken, but he wasn't untouched. The gym behind him was quiet. The last radio had gone silent, maps folded, boots laid to dry. Through the open doors, he could see them, waiting, breathing, hoping. He dried his hands on a worn towel, took one breath, and stepped into the light. As Henry emerged, the square fell silent. Even the dogs stopped barking. Even the wind respected the moment. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of recognition, of reverence, of something returning to its place. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, slower than before. No podium, no folder, no smile. In his hands, a folded firefighter's jacket, Henry's, freshly laundered, pressed. But it couldn't erase what had been done to it. Mud had once stained it. Rain soaked it. It had lain on courthouse steps like trash. Now it was held out like an offering. The mayor's voice cracked like dry wood. "We failed you, Henry. I failed you." He swallowed hard. "The town forgot what you gave, what you were, what you still are." He extended the jacket. "This town doesn't deserve you, but it needs you." Henry didn't move for a long time. He looked at the jacket, then passed it to the people. Some eyes were wet, some lowered in shame, some reached toward him without moving a muscle. He stepped forward, but not to take it. He set the jacket gently on the bench beside him, looked to the crowd, then spoke. Not loud, but clear. "I didn't come back to be needed." A pause. A breath. "I came because I remember what this place used to be, and what it still could be." No one applauded. No one clapped his back. They just listened. Because some truths don't need echo. They just need space to land. He didn't raise his voice, didn't cry, didn't ask for thanks. Because men like Henry Benson don't lead with words. They lead with presence. And presence? It's what Pine Ridge had lost, and what they just got back. The field was blackened now, smoked at the edges, the trees charred, the sky clearer than it had been in days. And Henry stood there, hands in his pockets, looking over the ridge where the fire once came. Beside him, the eagle, perched proud atop a wooden fence post, its feathers gleaming under morning light, healed, unchained, still. Then, without a sound, it spread its wings wide and lifted. It soared once, twice, then vanished beyond the treetops, rising into endless air. Henry watched it, neck craned back. And then, a flicker at the edge of his mouth. Not a smile, but something close. Something like peace. That day, Pine Ridge remembered something it had forgotten. That strength doesn't always wear medals. Sometimes it walks in worn-out boots. Sometimes it carries scars that don't show. And sometimes it returns when you least deserve it, to remind you of who you once were and who you could be again. Because men like Henry Benson, they don't stand tall for applause. They stand because it's right, because someone has to, because even when the world casts them aside, they still believe in saving what's left. Henry walks alone, down the gravel road at the edge of town. No music, no cheers, just the soft flap of wings above. The eagle circles once, then disappears into the morning sky. And Henry? Still walking, still standing.
Thanks for spending time with us today. If this story meant something to you, pass it on. This is Still Standing Souls. Real stories, quiet strength, lasting hope.